do take the opportunity to share this with your friends and your colleagues. And we have a very great charge here to deal with. And I'm hoping that you all are able to glean from most of it, all things that we have to deal with regarding our perspective of Christendom and where we are within it. So let's just get started with this. I think it's going to be a topic we all need to look at and consider. Hope that no one is offended, but if you are, please know that our heart is not to offend you. It is to inform you and to put things into perspective. And I'm hoping that many can embrace this truth because it's a difficult thing oftentimes to deal with. But many people will always say one thing and do another. But today we're going to really touch this because I think I'm done um, trying to be the mediator and peacemaker in the scenarios we have before us often enough times. So let's get ourselves prepared and let's get ourselves ready for what I think is going to be a dynamic teaching. And I want all of you to take the opportunity to embrace this as we move forward, prayerfully in a vein that is conducive to all things that are our life, um, and that's what we're going to do. So let's get started. I hope that you guys will take the opportunity to do that, to join in right now in a word of prayer. Father, we come before you in the mighty name of Yeshua HaMashiach. There is literally none like you in all the earth, and we thank you for the hope and help and peace that you render unto us. We're asking you to grace us with your presence and more importantly with your wisdom. We need you like never before, and everything that is you, we trust has given us hope and help and peace. Our lives, we depend on you. We need you like never before. And we're asking for your purpose and your plan to grace us in a way um, that is proper. We love you. We repent for any and all sins, every thought, idea of sin, anything that could have transgressed your will for our lives. We're asking you now to cover us as we move into that vein and we touch the things that are of you and you alone. Our joy and our hope is in you. Our desire is to experience you. Our our efforts are to bring glory to your name in all ways possible. So we ask this, knowing that you hear and answer our prayers, knowing that you'll be with us in this conversation. And with all things, we lift our hands to you, we lift our heart to you, and we ask, more importantly, that you would grace us with an understanding of you so that we can walk in the ways of you literally and consistency and consistently because you alone are holy. In the precious and the mighty name of Yeshua HaMashiach. I digress and I decrease that your spirit would increase. And I hope and pray that all things you would come forth on this platform today and nothing of me, but all things of that truth and your mindsets for us this day. We ask this knowing you hear us and we desire that we can hear you. We ask this in the name of our Savior, Yeshua HaMashiach. And we all say, Amen. All right, everybody, let's get started. It's going to be in a very interesting time. We're going to get started right here live on our Facebook feeds as well. Come on, let's get that done. Thank you very well. And let's look at some things that we need to really talk about because today is a very humbling scenario before us that we have to consider and deal with certain things today in this age that we are in. And before we get started, I am asking you all to consider what needs to be done here today and what we'll be talking about in this series. So please, we're going to put the replays on. We have no problem for the backlash that will come towards us behind this. And these are career damaging types of scenarios that we'll be talking about today. And I'm hoping you guys can, in fact, pray for me because I know the backlash. I've done this before and it comes heavy, it comes hard. But Yahweh be praised because it's necessary. And if you have children and you are a melanated person in the United States of America, or even if you are in a different country and you're still dealing with the police and policing and the fact that you're saved and wanting to remain saved and making it your business to stay saved, there are perspectives we have to take on, and not everything is going to be based on us taking a position um, that says turn another cheek, or not understanding what turn another cheek means. So I hope that you guys will share this. You don't have to, but if you came in on Facebook, you want to go ahead and hit the heart sign, like sign, and we're going to move into some things that I hope will inspire you to pray and know better how we should operate with what we do and how we do it. All right. So that's what we want to do there. All right. So remove that. It's just way too big. It's too big. Thank you. All right. So Zion, today we are dealing with the subject matter, as many of you know, the state of Black American citizens with kingdom perspective. Everything that could go wrong is trying to go wrong this morning to get this particular message out to you guys. And we're glad to be able to do it, but technology just won't let us be great again today. But today's subject is going to be really dealing with the realities that after this last shooting in Buffalo, in general, many of the shootings. This first part of our lesson, we want to talk about what police shootings and policing and citizenship in our society are about. So let me put this disclaimer out here. I have many people in my life, in my family, in our ministry who are law enforcement officers at the beat, the patrol, the highway patrol, the state level, the federal level, CIA. I know people in Homeland Security. I know a lot of people and a lot of LEOs. I pray for our law enforcement officers every day. We need law enforcement officers. And there is an ignorant cry to defund the police, though I understand where it comes from, but the reality of what has to happen, those crying for defund the police will be the first ones needing the police if scenarios of that request are met. But we do have a bigger problem with the police and why the cry for defunding it exists. And we have to first, from a kingdom perspective, start looking at this not as just a matter of prayer or what we typically do, get a rally and go and protest. But in truth, we have to begin to deal with this from a mindset of what the word says. Now, typically within Christendom, we want to go and grab some speaker and jump behind them and walk down the street and kumbaya and say, we're standing here in solidarity so that there can be a change of true effectiveness in how our citizenship and our communities exist. And I'm all for that. The problem is we do that way too much without any real understanding of how to bring effective change. And thereby our efforts appear to be, and in some cases, completely void of power. This last shooting of this young man, and my computers have gone down. I've only got one computer with me right now that is giving me what I need. So much of my notes that I want to share with you guys are trapped in this computer. I think I may have been hacked by using a internet service that was not my secured service. And now I cannot pull up my notes because I don't use the cloud either. So deal with me and my conspiracy theories later, but that's my life. So here is why today we speak. Um, this last shooting of this young man being shot 60 times triggered for me my own personal experience of watching my father be beaten by Billy Club, his friends be beaten by Billy Club, myself be beaten, um, my peers um, under times such as stop and frisk in the United States and New York, and other types of policies of policing in the United States of America, a country that I will never leave. I'm proud to be an American. I am honored to live here. There is literally no place else an African American can go and live, whether you believe that or not. Today, in these next 3 days, we're going to show you why. Some would say, why would you take this on the preceding word? Because this has to deal with kingdom. It has to deal with our lives. Now, there are many things that we assume about justice, just like there are many things we assume about church and Christianity. And since that's my audience, because I'm not teaching and speaking to anybody else, I'm not. They can listen to this in archives. I'm talking. My lessons are for the people who want to make their day of meeting the Father. I'm talking to people who believe in the rapture. I'm talking to people who believe in He who hung on the cross. I'm talking to people who believe that our Savior came and died and rose again, that Elohim is creator of heaven and earth. So if you're not into that, parts of this conversation and the reason for why I'm having this conversation, you're not going to agree with, but we will make some other political reasonings something you have to consider if you have not. So within Christianity, which is what I do all day, every day, we have some assumed positions and theories because someone told us something about He who hung on the cross. We wrapped it around some idea, propagated it, ran with it, and now this is what we have. The same thing is true in our real world, no matter what continent you're on, that we take regarding justice. We just assume the words to protect and serve are for everybody. And today, in these next 3 days, I'm going to show you that they are not. Should they be? Absolutely. Are those in law enforcement officer positions believing it as well? Yes. But even many of them have not gone back to do the homework and the research on why they have the job of law enforcement officers. Same thing for teachers in our school systems. So we have good people who have good jobs and have a certain ideal about their job. And when things go left, like these riots we've been having, these issues that we call police brutality or other elements that start wars that disproportionately affect certain ethnicities and groups that have been redlined and contained and compartmentalized. We have a lot of assumptions. Today, I'm just dealing with one that I'm often called into whenever we have a problem of a shooting, whether it's gang related, whether it's, as we have now coined the phrase, black on black crime, like there's not white on white crime, like there's not Hispanic on Hispanic crime. And I'm not trying to tit for tat and drag this apart, but we have made certain things almost epithet because we have made our business to propagate error. So today we want to just clear some things up. For those who follow with us, and those of you who know what I do and how I do it and how I'm in the streets every day, I'm dealing with all types of individuals. Moderator, please. And when we deal with these issues, they are very sensitive matters. We are going to talk, and I'm going to offend pastors. I don't mean to, but I can't get around it. I'm going to offend really good people who are law enforcement officers, and you're going to be offended because I'm going to expose what it is you're hired under. I'm not coming for you, but I want everyone to understand this information that literally looms over what happens between law enforcement and certain communities and community members. I'm also going to offend indirectly people who are melanated and from other nations, because I'm going to be dealing with an issue specific, though not isolated, to the United States of America. But we're going to learn globally about this matter. So at this time, I want to make sure I put those disclaimers out there. I am for our police. We are to pray for our police. All of our first responders, they put their lives on the line, and one bad apple should not be the qualifier for how we judge the entire group. But we do need to give some information so that we are understanding a lot of our thought process and our ideology that we've assumed we have to really readdress. And it's not going to be us going out there doing protests to where we can get ourselves shot, imprisoned, maimed, or hurt even the more. We need to begin to understand the core of it. So today, and these next 3 preceding words, we are going to delve deep into a history lesson many people never took time to read. So again, the offense is not intentional, but I don't come to bring peace about this matter. I come to bring a sword to open this thing up and give you discernment on why things are as they are. You may agree, you may not agree. I love you no matter what. And you can talk to me, you can question me, you can ask me how I feel about it, that's fine. But this information you can Google yourself, and you can get vetted by any attorney and any politician who's worth their salt. You can go and get this information. May make them check why they're in office too. So politicians, you're going to get slightly offended. I'm going to say things in passion, but they are not at you. They are at system. I'm coming for the system, not the individuals who got into the system. Good people, but sometimes we don't know what we got into. And though we need politics because we live in a democratic society, we need law enforcement, we need judging, we need justice. All of these things are kingdom principles. So let's begin. The state of this Black African American citizen with a kingdom perspective. Now, the word of Elohim tells us that we are to obey the laws of the land. And I believe in that. We should. There is no doubt and no way around that. The laws of the land are here so that we can have order and we can have a common understanding of how things should flow. And then there are always exceptions to rule. However, we have these prejudices that do exist, and they're not always racial prejudices, though race is probably the biggest part of it, and that affects what we call economics. It affects policing. It affects education, but it is a real thing. So today I'm going to first off take an article, and I want all of you to grab this article. You can go to thenewyorker.com and pull up the invention of the police. Now, you have myriads of documents and articles and op-eds on this subject matter, because you've got everything from Martin Luther King and beyond, him and Frederick Douglass. You've got all of the different things that America has had to deal with, modern day issues, great writers who've talked about this plight. But today I want to deal with one specific thing, and I think it surmises. I've read many, but this one surmises it the best. And it is with the New Yorker. And you can go to newyorker.com/magazine 2020-720, the invention of the police. I'm going to read this, and it's pretty lengthy, but it's going to set premise for where we are. And I say it's important because I can no longer continue thinking that in this place called the United States of America, my home, I do not plan to go back to Africa. I do not plan to leave America because of the racism and or the injustices that we encounter, because they will be at a different level no matter where you are. And people don't realize that most Americans are not welcomed in other countries. We have more enemies than we think. And the only reason we are in a lot of power is because we have done some things to put us in power. Nonetheless, every country has. So what's the lesser of two evils? I'm where I'm at. I'm born here in America. I don't even know where my people are from. I don't know what country in Africa this American descendant of slaves comes from. We are mixed together because of an issue of slavery and selfishness by people wanting to rule the world. And we are byproducts of that. Many of you have the beautiful joy of knowing who your ancestors are. Many African Americans had this great hope with Alex Haley's wonderful story. Kunta Kinte and Chicken George and all those people, but there are many of us who have no idea what country from the continent of Africa we come from. And to be labeled an African American is disrespectful. And it does grieve my soul that no one until recently started to realize that Africa is not a country. Africa is a group of countries, a lot of countries. So that means that they didn't care where they snatched people from, and those countrymen who helped others be enslaved and carried off of their country land, whether they were enemies of their families or what have you, whatever gave them reason to aid in this Pan-African American trade, slave trade. We can't even go back to that now, but you must understand that there are those of us, I have no country to go to. So my melanated brothers and sisters who are from other countries and you are living in America and you came here, some of the things I'm going to say do not reflect my thoughts about you, just the reality that we all have to consider. Because as an African American with this dialect, this English dialect, not patois, not Haitian, not Cuban, not Nicaraguan, not Ghanaian, not Swahili, not South African. This dialect, this American English dialect, when we who are of melanation get stopped with this dialect or a good facsimile thereof, it's a different police encounter than when you, my brothers and sisters who have come to America to take opportunities, to have a great life and start fresh in a new country, you technically have dual citizenship. So when a law enforcement officer stops you and stops me, the conversation is different. They know that you have a embassy you can go to. And some of you are saying, well, wait a minute, I'm an American citizen. I'm so glad you are. I love you dearly. But I want to make sure we understand that there are some very clear delineating factors. And I know that there are major arguments over ADOS and other melanated people from other countries. I'm not in that war. I love you. I don't care where you're from. But when it comes to the legalities that are here in our country and all the legalities that deal with what this injustice is about, all Black lives mattering are not necessarily, moderators please, are not necessarily the same. So if you have an accent, maybe you're from the Caribbean, maybe you're from Haiti, maybe you're from Guyana, maybe you're from Ghana, maybe you're from Nigeria, maybe you're from Uganda, your accent will instantly trigger a different dialogue in that police encounter. And there's history why. We're going to talk about it. But we got 3 days to do it. So this is a slow cook. And I'm hoping you will do one thing I ask. Pay attention. The article of the New Yorker Critic at Large was written on July 20th, 2020. It's written by Jill Lepore. And the invention of the police was, I think, a great summarizing of my already understood and comprehended ideal of how policing got started, but it's going to expand some things. But I want you to listen to this article. The invention of the police. Why did American policing get so big, so fast? The answers is mainly slavery. To police is to maintain law and order, but the word derives from polis, the Greek word for city or polity, by way of politia, the Latin word for citizenship. And it entered into English from the Middle French word police, which meant not constables, but government. So the phrase, the police, as a civil force charged with deterring crime, came to the United States from England and is generally associated with monarchy, meaning keeping the king's peace, which makes it surprising that in this anti-monarchical United States, policing got so big so fast. The reason is mainly slavery. A phrase, abolish the police, became a rallying cry, and it dates back to 1988, the year when NWA, and I'm going to say some words because they are applicable. Do not think I am not saved, but you need to get the full effect of this, and I'm very careful and conscious of what I'm saying. But the year that the NWA, which was a rap group, they recorded a song entitled Fuck the Police. NWA is an acronym for Niggers with an Attitude. But long before anyone called for its abolition, someone had to invent the police. The ancient Greek polis had to become the modern police. To be political, to live in a polis, meant that everything was decided through words and persuasion and not through force and violence. Hannah Arendt wrote in the article called The Human Condition. Now, in the polis, men argued and debated as equals under a rule of law. Outside the polis, in households, men dominated women, children, servants, and slaves under a rule of force. Now, this division of government sailed down the river of time like a raft, getting battered, but also getting bigger, collecting sticks and mud. Kings asserted a rule of force over their subjects on the idea that their kingdom was their household. Now, in 1769, William Blackstone, in his article, Commentaries of the Laws of England, he argued that the king, as pater familia of the nation, directs the public police, exercising the means by which the individual of the state, like members of a well-governed family, are bound to conform their general behavior to the rules of priority, good neighborhood, good manners, and to be decent, industrious, inoffensive in their respective stations. The police, based on what he's saying, are the king's men. History begins with the etymology, but it doesn't end there. The polis, P-O-L-I-S, is not the police, P-O-L-I-C-E. The American Revolution toppled the power of the king over his people in America because in America, the law is king. This is what Thomas Paine wrote. But not the power of a man over his family. The power of the police has its origins in that kind of power. Under the rule of law, people are equals. Under the rule of police, as the legal theorist Marcus Duber has written, we are not. We are more like the women and the children and the servants and the slaves in households back in ancient Greece, the people who were not allowed to be a part of the polis. But for centuries, through struggles for independence and emancipation and enfranchisement and equal rights, we've been fighting to enter the polis. One way to think about abolish the police then is as an argument that now that all of us have finally clawed our way into the polis, the police should be obsolete. But are they? Now, for those of you who may have just tuned in and not know what we mean by saying the polis, this word is the word from the Greek. The word we have called police is derived from the word polis, P-O-L-I-S, the Greek word for city or polity, which, again, by the way, it comes from a Latin word for politia, which means citizenship. Okay, so when we talk about police, polis, we're talking about citizens. The police is a civil force charged to deter crime. But the element is it's supposed to be a citizenship. The crisis in policing is the culmination of 1,000 other failures of education, social services, public health, gun regulations, criminal justice, economic development. And police have a lot in common with firefighters, EMTs, paramedics. They are there to help, often at great sacrifice, and by placing themselves in harm's way. It is a fact, it is true, and we need to honor those offices of our first responders. Now, the author of this particular article here, The Invention of the Police, goes on to state, to say that this doesn't always work out, however, it does not begin to cover the size of the problem. For instance, the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis cannot be just wished away by an outlier. In each of the past 5 years, police in the United States have killed roughly 1,000 people. During each of those same years, about 100 police officers were killed in the line of duty. One study suggests that among American men between the ages of 15 and 34, the numbers were treated, the numbers of those who were treated in emergency rooms as a result of injuries inflicted by the police and or security guards was almost as great as the number who, as pedestrians, were injured by motor vehicles. Urban police forces are nearly always whiter than the communities they patrol. The victims of police brutality are disproportionately Black teenage boys, children. To say that many good and admirable police are police officers, dedicated and brave public servants, is of course true. But because it's true, it does not fail to address both the nature and the scale of the crisis and the legacy of centuries of racial injustice. The best people with the best intentions doing their utmost, these great men and women of African-American descent and other cultural descents, trying to balance out the racial lines as she is indicating here, and I am interjecting. It is an awesome effort and we need it. We have to be infiltrated into those areas and offices. But as she states here, the best people with the best intentions doing their utmost cannot fix this system from within. There are nearly 700,000 police officers in the US of A. About 2 for every 1,000 people, a rate that is lower than the European average. The difference is guns, they believe. Now, I am not against the Second Amendment. I am for it. I am, VW, a licensed gun owner. I am a licensed carrier. I do all things legal. Today, I can't say I did when I was younger, but today we do all things legal under the Constitution and under what rights we have. So this next portion of this conversation pushes into an argument about gun control, which I'm not warring with them on this. Police in Finland fired 6 bullets in all of 2013. In an encounter on a single day in 2015 in Pasco, Washington, 3 policemen fired 17 bullets when they shot and killed an unarmed 35-year-old orchard worker from Mexico. 5 years ago, when The Guardian counted police killings, it reported that in the first 24 days of 2015, police in the US fatally shot more than the police did in England and in Wales combined over the past 24 years. American police are armed to the teeth. And I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm okay with that. It's not the gun that kills the person. It's the mentality behind the trigger.
That's truth right there.
So American police, though armed to the teeth, and they have $7 billion worth of surplus military equipment that's offloaded by the Pentagon to 8,000 law enforcement agencies since 1997. At the same time, they face the most heavily armed civilian population in the world. 1 in 3 Americans owns a gun, typically more than one. I can attest to that. Gun violence undermines civilian life and debases everyone. We don't disagree with that, but it's not anyone who is a responsible citizen of society engaging in the nefarious deeds that these officers have to contend with. Back to the article, a study found that given the ravages of the streets, white male police officers in Buffalo have a life expectancy of 22 years shorter than that of the average American male. I can go different with this. We're going to chew meat, throw bone away here. The debate about policing also has to do with the money that's spent paying heavily armed agents for the state to do the things that they aren't trained to do and that other institutions would do better. That we 100% agree with. History haunts this debate like a bullet-riddled ghost. That history begins in England. In the 13th century, when maintaining the king's peace became the duty of an officer of the court called a constable, aided by his watchman, every male adult could be called on to take a turn walking a ward at night and, if trouble came, to raise a hue and cry. This practice lasted for centuries. A version we encountered of that in America was George Zimmerman, when he shot and killed Trayvon Martin in 2012. He was serving as his neighborhood watch. The watch didn't work especially well in England. The average constable is an ignoramus who knows little or nothing of the law. This is what Blackstone wrote. And it didn't work especially well in England colonies either. Rich men paid poor men to take their turns on watch, which meant that most watchmen were either very elderly or very poor and very exhausted from working all day. Boston established a watch in 1631. New York tried paying watchmen in 1658. In Philadelphia in 1705, the governor expressed the view that the militia could make the city safer than the watch, but the militias weren't supposed to police the king's subjects. They were supposed to serve the common defense, waging wars against the French, fighting native people who were trying to hold on to their land, or suppressing slave rebellions. The government of slavery was not a rule of law. It was a rule of police. In 1661, the English colony of Barbados passed its first slave law. They revised it in 1688. It decreed, and I quote, Negroes and other slaves were wholly unqualified to be governed by the laws of our nations. And they devised instead a special set of rules for the good regulating and ordering of them. Now, Virginia adopted similar measures known as slave codes in the 1680s. Here is what that wrote. And here is the code from 1680 in the state you and I know as Virginia. It shall not be lawful for any Negro or other slave to carry or arm himself with any club, staff, gun, sword, or any other weapon or defense or offense, nor to go or depart from of his master's ground without a certificate from his master, his mistress, or overseer, and such permission not to be granted, but put upon particular and necessary occasions. And every Negro or slave so offending, not having a certificate, as aforesaid, shall be sent to the next constable, who is hereby enjoined and required to give said Negro 20 lashes on his bare back, well laid on, and so sent home to his said master, mistress, or overseer. That if any Negro or other slave shall absent himself from his master's service and lie hiding or lurking in obscure places, committing injurious to the inhabitants, and shall resist any person or persons, that they shall by any lawful authority be employed to apprehend and take said Negro. That then in case of such resistance, it shall be lawful for such person or persons to kill the said Negro or the slave, so lying out and resisting. That crap's been in there since 1680. And you never paid attention to the fact that the police cry, stop resisting. Now, we have a lot of years between these things, but this spirit still governs the system. And you're saying, oh, well, we've matured beyond that. No, we haven't. No, we have not. And the amount of disproportionate African Americans, literal African Americans, not melanated skinned people in the United States. There are exceptions to rule. But if you take up all the cases that you have, the disproportionate amount of those melanated bodies that are left now to mourn in America are not people who came from other citizenships and made America their citizenship. There are people who came over as descendants of those particular slaves. And when they hear our dialect, the resisting arrest is yielded and spoken. And it's usually only in those cases. That is a hard fact to swallow. Let me continue reading. In the 18th century, New York, a person held as a slave could not gather in a group of more than 3, could not ride a horse, could not hold a funeral at night, could not be out after sunset without a lantern, and could not sell Indian corn, peaches, or any other fruit in any street or on any market in the city. Stop and frisk, stop and whip, shoot to kill. Sound familiar? And I know that there are people who I love and are very well educated, and you have come through all the echelons of academia, and you feel that I am probably trying to light and blow the embers of something we think has been gone, and it's not. I am not trying to give credence to it. I'm simply trying to show you that it does exist, and then our kingdom approach has to be above it. But we don't even know what we're to be above. So that's why I'm taking the time to explain this over 3 days. But you need these facts. This spirit still exists. Now, as kingdom believers, do we have Messiah? Absolutely. Does he cover us? Absolutely. Does he take care of all things for us? Absolutely. However, we do have a dilemma. We're wrestling against not flesh and blood, but principality and power and ruler of darkness of this world and spiritual wickedness in high places. And these things you need to identify. Now, why have I taken this course? I want to finish this article and we're almost done. Then there were issues called slave patrols. Now, I want to touch this for the Christians who are out here and those of you who do not understand when I tell you that you telling women in Christendom to be silent in the church, and I've tried to tell you guys this once before, that when Paul was writing that to the Corinthian church, women keep silent in church, ask your questions at home, it's because this word polis from the Greek dealt with citizenship. But under that guise of polis in the Greek, citizenship, the men dominated the society. So the men dominated and ruled the home. And their home, wife, children, slaves, or what have you, were subject to the men. So in public, men were the only ones allowed to speak. If women spoke in public, it was an offense. It was agreed. It was an offense of the culture, and that husband would get in trouble, or he himself would put her down. So you could only ask questions at home. So when Paul wrote that, and I want to dispel this forever for all of you that do not know this, when Paul wrote that, he wrote that with this cultural Grecian in a Greek society, in a Greek community. He had this law in mind, not Torah. He told them to be free in the liberties wherewith Messiah has set you free. And the women coming to these meetings with their husbands who were being conformed, they would begin to ask questions in public because they got free, but they forgot they still live in Greece. And Paul is saying, if any people not about what we're about come in, though curious about what we're doing, find you guys talking, asking questions out loud, they will take that back to whatever authorities you have in Greece, and your husbands and your families will suffer the wrath of the breach of that law. So women, be quiet in the church. Now, y'all can come off a microphone right now and tell me that you understand where this came from. That
I understand where this came from. Yes, I understand, sir. I understand now.
Oh, yes. Amen. I understand.
And this law still sits on the books in Greece. That's why Paul told the women, keep silent in the church. Now you know the rest of the story. Getting back to this article, The Invention of the Police by Jill Lepore, which helps summarize a lot of what I'm going to be talking about over these next 3 days. I did not take her concept. I happened to come across it while I'm reading many other ideas to bring you guys a solid comprehension on this matter and why the kingdom has to look at this a certain way. Let me continue. I will recap the last piece. In the 18th century New York, a person held as a slave could not gather a group and more than a group of three, couldn't ride a horse, couldn't hold a funeral at night, could not be out after hours without a lantern, could not sell certain things. And then they had the concept of stop and frisk, which you had in New York, stop and whip and or shoot to kill, which is whenever we're arrested by police unconsciously, this spirit fatally shoot. You can have 18 men dealing with one man. And if one of those 18 feels threatened, all 18 shoot that one man. That is a spirit.
Amen.
Then there were the slave patrols. And most people don't know this. Most of you who come from other countries, and now that the world has opened up through the internet, it would be isolated to America, and you have your own issues in Australia, in the UK, in all the other continents on the earth and countries that go on, China, Japan, wherever. However, in America, we have slave patrols that are the origin for sheriff departments and police departments that still exist. And that spirit looms from north, south, east, or west in the United States of America. And I don't care how many slaves they allowed to get on the police department. I don't care how many slaves they allow to get on the sheriff's department. There is a code. And though we need all of our LEOs to be representative of the communities that they serve, until we can get that kind of authentic change and real input and input, We can't get that now. You know why? Because the African Americans that they have been policing have been marked. They've been marked since the 3rd grade in school. They've been labeled as special education. There is an issue in Florida that right now and Senator Siplin, Gary Siplin, he's been fighting against this since he's been in office. But one of the things they would do with this testing called the FCAT, Florida Comprehension Assessment Testing, the FCAT would be given in the 3rd grade. And whoever failed the FCAT in the 3rd grade would be the stimulus for how many prisons to make by the time that 3rd grader becomes an 18-year-old. So however many people fail the FCAT, and y'all can, this is true, they would use that number to determine how many jail cells to make each year. That's just the state of Florida. Texas runs a similar scenario. New Jersey, low key, runs a system as well. Pennsylvania, the same way. And New York, without doubt. So I need you to understand that there are things at play that will prohibit us from ever getting justice. Because in the truth of it, African Americans, it's just us. So someone from a different country who is melanated could have an issue in the country that they're living in. They could be labeled by their country, but as long as they don't have a matter, an issue that hits Interpol, which is an international policing, as long as they don't have an issue that elevates to Interpol, a person who may be problematic in their own country could move to the United States of America and take the test to become an officer. And it's as if they are a clean citizen of society, and they can become an officer before a young, an African American in America could ever become considered for a job to properly represent, to show proper representation of his or her community. Did y'all know that?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So all of these things are extremely important for us to understand. You want justice? It's going to require us starting with our children very early on and making sure, as I had to do for my son, who they wanted to label and put into what they call a CEP program. Now, CEP had a real interesting pendulum swing. It was for those who were elite, gifted, and then it was for those who needed assistance. Well, they were trying to put my son in a CEP program at the 3rd grade because my son and my daughter living in my home, when the parent of that home gave our children conversations of adults, my children are around all adults most time because I was pastor, and my having to take them almost everywhere, they were in adult conversations. So when my son would go to school, my daughter was already in the gifted program. She was already in the gifted program. But when my son came through, my daughter was light skinned. My son was a little bit more dark skinned. So therefore, they didn't make the connection. My son was now being told he was a problem in class. So because I'm very much involved in PTA, the SS, yeah, I know the stuff, all the little parent associations that you do in schools, all those wonderful things. I'm very much involved, but they didn't know that that was my son, even though he had my namesake. But what they did was they said, your son is a problem. I said, well, let me sit outside the class for 3 days. And I did. I assessed my son from outside the window. The principal and I had a beautiful relationship. They allowed me to do this. The CRTs allowed me to do this. I sat and I watched my son in situations that tests were being taken. They said my son was talkative. They said my son was all of these things. And he was never those things at home. So I go to the school and I watch my son for 3 days. We set it up. They help me to hide and we do it. The teacher gives my son and the class homework, work assignments. My son is done in 15, 20 minutes. It's a 40-minute program. So he's sitting there with his pencils, playing drums on his table. He's wrong. But he's done in half the time. The rest of the class is still doing it. He's bored. You were about to label my son because your system can't keep his brain.
Come on.
And if I didn't step in for my son, he would have been labeled and where he would be today. I said, test my son for gifted. Lo and behold, he scored off the charts. Many of you have had your sons and your daughters labeled because the class does not keep their attention. And they finish the work and they finish the work and they will label that child. Now, here's the problem. Once they label that child CEP, now they put them in situations that the child will feel bound in. And then they begin to get themselves in trouble. Now they're called talking back. Now they're being written up. Now they're going to the guidance counselors, and the guidance counselors are only marking off whatever. And this little fake issue of psychological help that they're trying to render is not trying to help the child come out. It's just helping us to label the child so the next teacher that gets the child will know that the child has this going on. And that's not for the good of the child. It just helps the school system whose teachers float in and out like bees leaving a hive. There's no consistency and continuity. So now in these largely African-American attended schools, you have all these children labeled. And then when they go to higher levels, the more labels that they get, now they get in trouble. They become problematic. You treat them as problematic. The teacher next year sees them and says, oh, I've read your file. And so you're not going to do that in here. That's an issue. That's judgment. And you don't even know this child. So what I'm trying to say is someone in another country who may have taken the same path, gone through a whole bunch of stuff, been a truancy issue, been mischievous and gotten in trouble, and maybe even, as long as they don't have a record that reached up to Interpol, they could come into the United States of America and become a police officer. But those who have been labeled in the education system of America, born here, citizens, have no other country to be deported back to, will never get chance to become a police officer, which is why you have so many Latinos who are in our police force. That is not a dig at my Latin brothers and sisters. That is our system. I'm not offending anyone. I'm sharing facts you've not considered. One of the greatest benefits I have of the office and position that I hold in society is I'm asked into these places to bring resolve, write new legislation, and bring things to magistrates to consider. How can we make changes for both our LEOs, with our citizenship, our schools, with our communities, a myriad of things. And I'm now at the point where we have to start looking at this the right way. So policing is never going to be, in certain communities, proportionate to the community it serves. So if you got people from another community, we know this is obvious for you all, but sometimes it takes us to remind ourselves. If you have someone who comes from the suburbs, you can't think for a moment you really understand what's going on in the hood. The nuances are different. We say what's up, it means something different when you say what's up. And if you feel threatened because, one, you have a preconceived ideal about those melanated people, they're barbarians, they're ratchet, they're ghetto, they don't have, they'll steal, they're apes. And we see this as African Americans coming from even other melanated individuals who have come to this states. So when the narrative to get this job to be a police officer finally comes to the hands of someone who's melanated and from this state, they're just glad to get the job, and we're hoping to make change, but they're never going to be able to change the system. And there's not enough to be able to properly express, without all the stress of the job, the different needs for the communities that they grew up in and served. And government sits up high and says, well, there's a lot of gun problems over here. Well, there's gun problems over here because, there are drugs in that neighborhood, just like there's drugs up in the suburbs too. But when there's a gun shooting down here, it's an illegal matter. And so now you say we're going to send more police officers down there to even exasperate the problem, rather than, as you thought, control the problem. So your issue is to control it, not to solve it. And some substances that are of control exasperate and cause an explosion. And now you got a problem. And now you got to come in with the National Guard. Same type of problems going on in the suburbs. But you don't send a controlling mechanism to the suburbs. There's white on white crime, just like there's black on black crime. But we address them differently. Oh, could it be because of this next part? The history of many of our police departments. It's a fact. I'm sorry. And I'm not trying to fuel or incite rage. I'm trying to bring all involved to an educated position so we can look at this. And this is what the kingdom is supposed to do. And all you're getting, get understanding. Oh, but we get the fact that someone was shot senselessly. Now, was the person committing a crime? They may have been. This person was committing a crime, but they got shot differently. They got dealt with differently in their crime than this person did. I have a massive problem with these last shootings. I have a young man in Buffalo who injures and kills tens of people, loaded to the gills with artillery, magazines, ammunition, and assault weaponry. He shoots and kills with intent people. Another young man across town, across the country, is fleeing police because of a stop of street law. It's purported, not proven, that a bullet and a shot was fired from the back door of his car. Only him in the car. He can't drive it from the back seat. He has to drive it from the front seat, but it's purported while running that a bullet came out the back door, possibly two. No exit wound from the car has been found. Now, when the young man stops, he flees. Wrong. Is he fleeing the police? Wrong. In his vehicle? Wrong. Be charged. That's where we need the police. He need to be dealt with about that. This young man shot some people. He needs to be dealt with about that. That's what the police, the law, the rule of law should do. This young man should be dealt with by the rule of law. But it's funny, this man over here wasn't even tackled. This man over here wasn't tackled either. But 8 officers running after him all decided to drop to a knee and unload their magazines into his body. He shot and killed no one. This man shoots and kills everyone he puts his eyes on. Another young, and he's not even injured. He's taken into the car. Am I angry about the way? I'm very disappointed. Have been for years about every situation. I'm angry, and I'm refusing anymore to go into meetings where the LEOs come to me and those of my constituency and ask us to come and keep the peace in the neighborhood, when in fact you could have done that by not senselessly shooting him down like he's a beast. Where does that come from? Oh, let me show you the spirit behind it. This New Yorker article again with this artist and this author, Jill Lepore, brings this point to bear. Then there are the slave patrols. This concept comes from these slave patrols. These were armed Spanish bands called the Hermandades. I can't pronounce it. I'm not Hispanic. They hunted runaways in Cuba, beginning in the 15th century. This was a practice that was adopted by the English in Barbados a century later. It had a lot in common with England's posse comitas, a band of stout men that county sheriff could summons to chase down an escaped criminal. South Carolina, founded by slave owners from Barbados, authorized its first slave patrol in 1702. Virginia followed in 1726. North Carolina followed in 1753. Slave patrols married the watch to the militia. Serving on patrol was required of all able-bodied men. Often the patrol was mustered from the militia, and the patrollers used the hue and cry to call for anyone within hearing distance to join the chase. What were they chasing? The slave owner's property. What was their property that would run? Slaves. Thus, you called the police. So today, quite frankly, when the police are called into neighborhoods, particularly the hood, where home ownership is beneath the average, they're coming to a home that's rented, and the police is looking more importantly to protect the house of the owner who's renting it to some people who are acting barbaric in their perception. I said that from my heart because I know what I've lived. So, slave patrols married the watch. Serving on patrol was required of all able-bodied men. All patrollers used the hue and the cry to call for anyone within hearing distance to join in to the chase. That's how you got deputized. Neither the watch, nor the militia, nor the patrols were police, who, by the way, were French and considered despotic. Now, in North America, the French city of New Orleans was distinctive in having la police, armed city guards who wore militia-type uniforms. They received wages. They were an urban slave patrol. In 1779, Thomas Jefferson created a chair in law and police at the College of William and Mary. The meaning of the word began to change. In 1789, Jeremy Bentham, noting that police had recently entered the English language in something like its modern sense, made this distinction: police keep the peace, justice punishes disorder. No justice, no peace. That's what the Black Lives Matter protesters cry in the streets. No justice, no peace. That's what the police was supposed to be changing into. Then in 1797, a London magistrate named Patrick Cullum published a treatise on the police of the metropolis. He too distinguished peace kept in streets from justice administered by the courts. Police were responsible for the regulation and the correction of behavior and the prevention and detention of crimes. It's often said that Britain created the police and the United States copied it. One could argue that the reverse is true. Calhoun spent his teens and early 20s in colonial Virginia. He had served as an agent for the British cotton manufacturers and owned shares in sugar plantations in Jamaica. He knew all about slave codes and slave patrols, but nothing came to Calhoun's ideals about policing until 1829, when Home Secretary Robert Peel, in the wake of a great deal of labor unrest, and after years of suppressing Catholic rebellions in Ireland, in his capacity as the Irish Secretary, persuaded the Parliament to establish the Metropolitan Police, a force of some 3,000 men, headed by 2 civilian justices, later called commissioners, and organized like an army, with each superintendent overseeing 4 inspectors, 16 sergeants, and 165 constables, who wore coats and pants of blue and black top hats, each assigned a numbered badge and a baton. Londoners came to call these men, anybody know in London? Boobies. Is it boobies or bobbies? I think it's bobbies.
Bobbies.
They're bobbies. Yeah, I call them boobies. I made a mistake. It's bobbies. You know why? Because of the person Bobby Peel. It is also often said that the modern American urban police began in 1838 when the Massachusetts legislation authorized the hiring of police officers in Boston. This too ignores the role of slavery in the history of the police. In 1829, a Black abolitionist in Boston named David Walker published an appeal to the colored citizens of the world, calling for violent rebellion. 1 good Black man can put to death 6 white men. Walker was found dead within the year. Boston thereafter had a series of mob attacks against abolitionists, including an attempt to lynch William Lloyd Garrison, the publisher of The Liberator, in 1835. Walker's words terrified Southern slave owners. The governor of North Carolina wrote to his state's senators, "I beg you, will lay this matter before the police of your town and invite your prompt attention to the necessary arresting of circulation of the book by police." He meant slave patrols. In response to Walker's appeal, North Carolina formed a statewide patrol committee. New York established a police department in 1844. New Orleans and Cincinnati followed in 1852. Then later in the 1850s, Philly, Chicago, Baltimore, Population grew. The widening inequality brought about the Industrial Revolution, and the rise in such crimes as prostitution, burglary, all contributed to the emergence of urban policing. So did immigration, especially from Ireland and Germany, and the hostilities to immigration, a new party, the Know Nothings. They sought to prevent immigrants from voting, holding office, becoming citizens. In 1854, Boston banned its ancient watch and formally established a police department. That year, Know Nothings swept the city's elections. American police differed from their English counterparts. In the US, police commissioners, as political appointees, fell under local control with limited supervision. The law enforcement was decentralized, resulting in jurisdictional thicket. In 1857, the Great Police Riot, the New York Municipal Police, run by the mayor's office, fought on the steps of the city hall with the New York Metropolitan Police, run by the state. The Metropolitans were known as the New York Mets. That's a baseball team to this day. That year, an amateur baseball team of the same name was founded. Also, unlike its British counterparts, American police carried guns, initially their own. In the 1860s, the Colt Firearms Company began manufacturing a compact revolver called the pocket police model, long before the New York Metropolitan Police began issuing service weapons. American police carried guns because Americans carried guns, including Americans who lived in the parts of the country where they hunted for food and defended their livestock from wild animals. Americans who lived in the parts of the country that had no police, and Americans who lived in the parts of North America that were not in the United States. Outside of big cities, law enforcement officers was scarce. In territories that weren't yet states, there were U.S. Marshals and their deputies, officers, and federal courts who could act as de facto police, but only to enforce federal laws. If a territory became a state, its counties would elect sheriffs. Meanwhile, Americans became vigilantes, especially likely to kill indigenous people and to lynch people of color. So between 1840 and the 1920s, mobs, vigilantes, law officers, including the Texas Rangers, lynched some 500 Mexicans and Mexican Americans and killed thousands more, not only in Texas, but also in territories that became the states of California, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico. A San Francisco Vigilance Committee established in 1851 arrested, tried, and hanged people. It boasted a membership in the thousands. An LA Vigilance Committee targeted the lynched Chinese immigrants. The U.S. Army operated as a police force too. After the Civil War, the militia was organized into 7 new departments of permanent standing armies: the Department of Dakota, the Department of Plateau, the Department of Missouri, the Department of Texas, the Department of Arizona, the Department of California, the Department of Columbia. In the 1870s and 80s, the U.S. Army engaged in more than 1,000 combat operations against Native peoples. In 1890, at Wounded Knee, South Dakota, following an attempt to disarm a Lakota settlement, a regiment of cavalrymen massacred hundreds of Lakota men, women, and children. Nearly a century later, in 1973, FBI agents, SWAT teams, and federal troops and state marshals laid siege to Wounded Knee during a protest over police brutality and the failure to properly punish and torture the murder of an Oglala Soy man named Raymond Yellow Thunder. They fired more than 500,000 rounds of ammunition and arrested more than 1,000 people. Today, according to the CDC, Native Americans are more likely to be killed by the police than any other racial and or ethnic group, of which I too have blood. Modern American policing began in 1909 when August Vollmer, became the chief of police in Berkeley, California. Vollmer refashioned American police into an American military. He'd served with the 8th Army Corps in Philippines in 1898. For years, ever since the Spanish-American War days, I've studied military tactics and used them to good effects in rounding up crooks. He later explained, after all, we're conducting a war against the enemies of society. Moderators, who were those enemies? They were mobsters, bootleggers, social agitators, strikers, union organizers, immigrants, and Black people. To domestic policing, Vollmer and his peers adapted the kinds of tactics and weapons that had been deployed against Native Americans in the West and against colonized peoples in other parts of the world, including Cuba, Puerto Rico, Philippines, and socialists Julian Joe. As the socialist Julian Go, had demonstrated. Vollmer instituted a training model imitated all over the country by police departments that were often led and staffed by other veterans of the United States wars of conquest and occupation. A police captain, a lieutenant or lieutenant should occupy exactly the same position in the public mind as that of the captain lieutenant in the United States Army. Detroit's commissioner of the police said, today's police officers are disproportionately veterans of the U.S. wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, and many suffering from post-traumatic stress. The Marshall Project, analyzing data from the Albuquerque police, found that officers who were veterans are more likely than their non-veteran counterparts to be involved in fatal shootings. In general, they are more likely to use force and more likely to fire their guns. Vollmer-era police enforced a new kind of slave code called Jim Crow laws, which had been passed in the South beginning in the late 1870s and upheld at the Supreme Court in 1896. William G. Austin became Savannah's chief of police in 1907. Earlier, he had earned a Medal of Honor for his service in the U.S. Cavalry at Wounded Knee. He had also fought in the Spanish War. By 1960, African-American churches in the city were complaining to Savannah newspapers about the whole-scale arrests of Negroes because they are Negroes. Arrests that would not be made if they were white under similar circumstances. African-Americans also confronted Jim Crow policing in the northern cities, to which they increasingly fled. James Robinson, Philadelphia's chief of police, beginning in 1912, had served in the infantry during the Spanish-American War and the Philippine-American War. He based his forces training on manuals used by the U.S. Army at Leavenworth. Go reports that in 1911, about 11% of people arrested were African-American. Under Robinson, that number rose to 14.6% in 1917. By the 1920s, a quarter of those arrests were African Americans who, at the time, represented just 7.4% of the population. Progressive era, Vollmer-style policing criminalized Blackness, as the historian Khalil Gibran Muhammad argued in his 2010 book, The Commendation of Blackness, Race, Crime, and Making of Modern Urban America. Police patrolled Black neighborhoods and arrested Black people disproportionately. Prosecutors indicted Black people disproportionately. Juries found Black people guilty disproportionately. Judges gave Black people disproportionately long sentences. And then after all of this, social scientists observing the number of Black people in jail decided that as a matter of biology, Black people were disproportionately inclined to criminality. More recent, between the new Jim Crow and the criminalization of immigration and imprisonment of immigrants in detention centers, this reality has grown worse by population, by per capita incarceration rates, and by the expenditures. The United States exceeds all other nations in how many of its citizens, asylum seekers, and undocumented immigrants are under some form of criminal justice supervision. Muhammad writes in a new preface to this book, the number of African American and Latino people in American jails and prisons today exceeds the entire population of some African, Eastern European, and Caribbean countries. Policing grew harsher in the progressive era, and with the emergence of state police forces, and number of police grew too. With the rise of the automobile, some, like Californians, began as highway patrols. Others, including the states of Nevada, Colorado, Oregon, began as private paramilitaries, paramilitaries of industrialists, which employed the newest American immigrants, Hungarians, Italians, and Jews. Industrialists in Pennsylvania established the iron and the coal police to end strikes and bust unions, including United Mine Workers. In 1905, 3 years after a coal strike, the Pennsylvania State Police started operations. One state policeman should be able to handle 100 foreigners. The U.S. Border Patrol began in 1924, the year that Congress restricted immigration from Southern Europe. At the insistence of Southern and Western agriculturalists, Congress exempted Mexican from its new immigration quota in order to allow migrant workers to enter the United States. The Border Patrol began as a relatively small outfit responsible for enforcing federal immigration law and stopping smugglers at all of the nation's borders. In the middle decades of the 20th century, it grew to a national quasi-military focused on policing and southern border campaign of mass arrests and forced deportations of Mexican immigrants, aided by the local police like the notoriously brutal LAPD. As the historian Kelly Little Hernandez has chronicled, what became the Chicano movement began in Southern California with Mexican immigrants who protested the LAPD during the first half of the 20th century, even as growing film industries cranked out features about the Klansmen hunting Black people, cowboys killing Indians, police chasing Mexicans. More recently, you can find an updated version of these stories in LA Noire, a video game set in 1947 and played from the perspective of a well-armed LAPD officer who's driving along Sunset Boulevard, passes the crumbling and abandoned sets from D.W. Griffith's 1916 film Intolerance, imagined relics of an unforgiving age. Now, Zion, I want to make sure you understand there is a problem within our system, and it's got very little to do with not needing the police. It has more to do with understanding where policing started. And we got to go back and change the entire framework. We got to go back and begin to look at how this is done. So for what do we do as a kingdom citizen? Every day I get up, every time I get in my car, in America, the only country that I can live in. What? For real. There's no sense in me going to another country. Go back to Africa. You can't. We've done that. My daughter went over to certain countries in Africa. We got missionaries we send to certain countries all over the planet. And the disdain for the Americans, outside of its money, its support, and its military, the disdain for the mindset, the mentality of the Americans, even in the UK, definitely amongst the Frenchmen, they can't stand us. We're just, and if you're not born there, then you're not welcome there. Oh, you can come, yeah, as travels. We can come in and check out what you do and pour into your community and pump our dollars there. Yeah, you'll take our dollars. But in America, in other parts of the country, in Latino countries, in African countries, in China, wherever we go, the only thing that the African American is respected for is their looseness with their money. And even that now, based on customer service experiences, is an atrocity. The only thing we're noted for is the fact that we spend money and we own nothing. So therefore, the police are not protecting to serve and serving to protect you. They're serving to protect those who own and have. And since there's not enough of us, unlike many of our counterparts who have come over to these United States, and literally, do you guys not understand, and this is a fact, you can search this out anywhere in America, that if an African American went to start a business and purchased, let's just say, a 7-Eleven, if I search and get that, even in an enfranchised and a empowerment zone, okay? If I start that store, I got to start paying taxes right away. I have to meet certain code enforcement issues with both the labor law and as well as the county and the building laws of the city, of the county, of the state, of the federal government. In my neighborhood. And in order to get any kind of a benefit, I got to start hiring people within my neighborhood to get a tax break, just a small smidgen of a tax break. And then in our Black communities, African American communities, every other country who comes over here, they come into our neighborhood. It's targeted from afar. They have enough money to start a company. So they'll go in and buy a store in an African American community. They receive, as a new citizen coming to promote business, they'll go to some of our deprived. Our areas are deprived because we can't get what foreigners get when they come into the States. They can start a 7-Eleven. They get 5 years tax-free on whatever they're earning. They get time to get caught up to coding and other issues and let their lawyers drag the matters through the mud. And then they can serve you in subpar scenarios with subpar service in your neighborhood. Take all of your capital, because you buy milk there, you buy your cigarettes there, you buy your spliffs there, you buy your potato chips there, you buy your soda, your water, your gas there, and they don't even put back a park bench. All that money that they earn goes to wherever they come from, and that's fine. That's business. That's why you start a business. I'm okay with that. That's entrepreneurial. That's industrial. But then that money goes back home. And after 5 years, they bring over and endorse and send visas and get sponsorships for their family to come. That's perfect. You should do that. I'm with that 100%. And then they can come in, and at the time of the 5 years, when now the taxes come due, they can sell the property to the next new person that they sponsor. Once they sell the company, I can stay on as the manager, and the company now takes ownership change and it goes to the next person. Guess what? Another 5 years tax-free. And in our neighborhoods, we let this exist. Now, we can't start our own stores in our own neighborhood, partly because our people, we have been so programmed that we can't even patronize each other without counting each other's pockets. And then if we feel that the person that we're actually patronizing starts to get a new car. Like I'm not patronizing them. They can get, they growing up. Listen, this seems scattered, but this is a reality, and this speaks to our mentality. So now when we're crabs in the basket with each other, and you go into a store that we don't own, when the police are called to that store we don't own because of an altercation with the owner, who do you think the police are protecting? Melanated person born in the United States. You lived in this neighborhood all your life. They just came over here 5 years ago, and now you're going to go to jail because of patronizing their business. And you can barely get out of the doldrums of where you live, and you still have to, with the money you have. Now, it's not that we can't, it's just that we have a issue. And this is an African American issue. This isn't a melanated person living in America issue. That's why I have a major problem with Black Lives Matter. Because every Black life is not having the problem. Now, they are having problems. Racism does exist. You can be caught up based on just your color. But the issue we're having right now with police injustice is primarily formatted by the fact that you and I, as African American descendants of slaves who don't know what country from Africa we hailed from. Some of us came through the Caribbean and Puerto Rico, and some of us have just came right to the shores of Virginia or the shores of Carolina, the shores of Jersey, the shores of New York back in the day, and you were just pulled off of whatever boat that your family was pulled off of, and you are a descendant of that. You have no place. You are old property. And you are still under laws that sit on our books today that we do not act like they exist. So you're not dealt with like police, P-O-L-I-S, the Greek word, the citizenship, though you have a citizen card. And most of us don't realize that this actual social security number is actually a government tool that they use to apply for loans. That's all your social security number is. That tells whoever the government wants to borrow money from that we have this many people in our country and we gain such a GDP from that, and we are able to pay back that particular note in so many years based on how many social securities that we can present to you. It is a banking instrument. First and foremost, our ignorance to these things are why I gotta speak out. And we gotta start making changes. It's not that the police person is bad. The police system is bad. And if the police system was properly done and given for its fairness, then the police person would follow the construct of that SOP. The SOP. And I don't care how you look at it, and I don't care how, by the time it gets from the top down to the beat, it's designed to oppress a certain area to make sure we stay in control over here. And if you can frustrate enough people, you know there's a psychology to policing. There's a psychology to the government of how to manage a mass of people. You got things such as eugenics. You have things, I'm not going to get into that today because the time is gone. It's 3 to 6. I'm late for another meeting. Before I get somebody mad at me again, I'm going to have to end this meeting. Have you guys learned anything today in this part 1 of the state of a Black American citizen?
Definitely. Absolutely, sir.
That sounds like my amen corner. That's what they call y'all. They call y'all my flunkies. Did y'all know that? I found out some stuff that my moderators are my flunkies, and they're my, my people. Someone invite Pastor Denzel up. Pastor Denzel, good to see you, sir.
Well, blessings, brother. Well, I'm not your flunky. I got my own mind. And so I'll give an out of court survey, since I was sitting here actually finishing up some social justice work. Very informative. A lot of stuff that people who do policy work or sit in revolutionary activism spaces, very few, I'm going to say this to your crowd because I want to edify. I have a lot of respect for BW. I have a lot of respect for his articulation. I have a lot of respect for his approach to the level of intelligence that he brings to the work, because there are very few people who are revs, pastors, apostles, whatever you want to be designated as, that actually are polymathematic. And he's one of the few people that I noticed that have that gift, that can speak to, and that he knows, me and him love talking about this stuff, but he really knows street code. I mean, and that's rare. Like, I'm talking about street code, and knows corporate, and can do the faith and blend them very well. Most pastors and revs out here stumble over their shoes, or they wear loud suits, or they're great theologians, but they're horrible with being able to articulate this thing on the layman's level. So I was very, very much, this was very professorial. It was good. It was refreshing for me. It got me rethinking, because my work in South Florida was gun violence,
right,
and police disputes. I'm now doing environmental justice, which is a whole nother, and maybe one day if you want me to break that down and how that intersects in this, I can. But everything you gave was right on point in history, and I would tell everybody, please, take these notices. I think anybody that does the work, we love Black Lives Matter. We have a big problem with the structure of the organization,
right,
and the institution of how it operates. And there's various reasons that we can get into, but I just wanted to give credence to your teaching, man. I never get a chance to come in and give you blessings. So thanks for doing this.
Thank you for being here tonight. We really appreciate those words. You never know who's watching and who's paying attention, but like you, I have a great deal of respect for your approach to getting things via faith. And again, that street code thing is very real. And I think if we could learn to take some introspection of where we've come from, we could find better ways to make paths going forward that actually are effective. And for the work that you're doing right now down there in South Florida, and I'm close to where you are, I'm well aware that South Florida's got some real gun issues, but it's not, again, the guns, it's the mentality behind the guns. And though we were created as a nation with the Second Amendment, matter of fact, if we didn't have the guns, we would be the UK, we would be Britain to some degree. And so there is a lot to be learned. Thank you for your words, my brother. Thank you for those kind words, leader in the faith and in your community. And we continue to pray for you and with you. And like you say, sometimes we try to get together and we can't because of our schedules, but it's always my joy to be in your space and have you in ours. All right. Thank you for your comments. Anybody else want to real quick have a comment or a statement? That's not a part of my flunky crew. That's not a part of our flunky crew.
Wanda Clark.
Wanda, I think you a flunky, Wanda Clark. They're not going to give you credence.
Well,
go ahead.
I'm proud to be called that. They can call me whatever they want to. I'm all right with that. They're new to your platform. I want to tell you, thank you so much for bringing such revelation as a Black woman from New York with a Black son that encountered, boy, I'm getting emotional.
Yeah, it can do that to you.
Stopping fresh error.
Yeah.
Stopping fresh error in the community in which I lived back then in public housing, and almost got arrested myself, defending my son. In the school system, same thing. Catholic school at that, for that matter, and being labeled. And so I want to thank you for what you brought to this platform. I want to thank you for taking me back and letting me know that Yahweh is pleased with how I handled everything. I was not afraid. How can you be afraid when you're defending the child that you brought into the world and the children that you bring into the world for what's right, just for the color of their skin? I never had a problem with the police until I had a black son. I always thought they were in my community to protect and serve. But I had a hard pill to swallow when that happened with my son. He almost didn't make it to college upstate. So I want to thank you. It took me through a lot of emotions, but this needed to be had. The conversation needed to be had in the eloquent way that you displayed it. I thank you. I thank Yahweh for you. And all those people that say the things that they say, they should take a page out of your book. I release my mic. God bless you.
Yahweh be praised.
Yahweh be praised.
To Yahweh be glory, and we're honored to have you as well with us here on platform. And I can't take any credit. I believe that we who have experienced what we've experienced, if you've watched as many of your family members be beaten with the old style billy clubs with the lead piece in the middle of it, the long stick they used to wear on their leg, to watch my mother's husband and some of our friends on our block just be beaten, to hear the bats hit the skulls, to go through the stop and frisk era, to be scared to death by arrogant nigger spouting police officers, and be afraid to be afraid to see the cops coming in the streets. It got to the point that our fear turned into a protection mechanism. And then we started to, in the streets, holler out, yo, 5-0. You know what I mean? Woody whoop, or whatever our cue and our code was in the streets. And it was to make sure that if they came through, in which the whole process of intimidation was incorporated. So if you've lived through that, all of that we did about our viewpoint of the police was based on the presentation of the police. Never getting to know the community, never getting to know us, but having this this collegiate survey being administered on the people that they'd never met. They just took percentages and they took demographics into play, and they treated us accordingly. No one was special. None of us were protected. None of us were served. And people who come over, because America is propagated across the world as the democratic place, it's a great democracy. The concept is awesome. I am honored to live in the United States of America. It is not perfect, though. And I suffer, and people of my persuasion suffer injustice, inequality, and yet we're still in the best country on the planet. The problem is, at any moment, it can change for us. I still have a problem with a man I watch, and you guys can YouTube these videos all day long. Caucasians down south literally beat up 2 officers. Not one of them pulled their taser, not one of them pulled their gun, and then they took the police car. The SWAT team or the helicopters were called out. That was just Bobby. Oh, when Bobby calms down, he'll bring the police car back. He beat, punched 2 police officers, kicked one of them down a ditch, took the vehicle. No one pulled gun. No one said stop resisting. Fortunately, we have a technology era of cameras on our phones. But there still isn't a desire. There still is not a desire and the higher ups of this hierarchy to change the spirit, to change the culture of policing. It's still, I don't care how many African Americans, Latinos, Mexicans get on the force, or foreigners get on the force, there's always going to be that element that in particular African Americans are going to suffer disproportionately under, unless the culture and the legislation is changed. Legislation has another edict that offsets the existing edicts. There is still a belief that we should not be able to vote. These are simple things that we thought we got victory over. Still a modern day crisis. People are dying for the right to vote. And people who think that they are privileged trying to suppress votes so that they can be in power, so that they can run the resource that has built this country, and that is the African American and the Latinos and the Native Americans and the resources that they possess. The only thing that people respect, I'm finding, about me in certain arenas is my money. Because they have a preset ideology about my mentality. And it takes years of wanting to know me to have that mentality changed. I hope you guys will come back. Y'all think this is worth you coming back for another 2 sessions? We'll be doing this again on this coming Monday for the preceding word and the following Wednesday. I've got much more to share with you guys.
Most definitely.
Wow.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes.
Now, to bring us to a conclusion, I need you to understand this. The kingdom perspective is to know that it is our responsibility to obey the laws of the land. That's the charge. Now, obeying those laws of the land require us also to understand who Elohim is. And so we must serve him. Follow peace with all men. Yes, Yahweh will fight our battles. We have this blessed assurance. But we can still go through some things that are unnecessary and can be rather painful. Nevertheless, the kingdom perspective is to follow and obey the rules of the land. And yes, it can be very challenging, I promise you. It can be very challenging. And the only way we can make that better, first off, is not look for the good old by and by to take us out of here, because we still have to occupy until he comes. So our job is to make sure that we train our children and get them into a position where they can become legislators. They can become the lawyers. And I don't mean ambulance chasers. They can become MDs, because we are dying disproportionately in these medical institutions as well, because there are certain issues that our particular body type doesn't deal with the way other body types deal with it. So you need to understand we need everything that is in our community having our representation in it. Don't just tell them to go to school to be a doctor and a nurse and then let them just stay at nurse level. If you're going to be a nurse, get your doctorate. We need nurses who can help and stop physicians who don't care, because we got some awesome physicians on this platform. I am so friggin' proud of the physicians that I know and how they lean on their well-educated nurses, doctorate degree nurses. They hold themselves accountable one with the other, and we can do so much more. We need more law enforcement officers, not just policemen. We need people who know the law, who can quote the law and enforce the law when the law is being breached and or improportionately used. Because only the law can correct the law. So we don't just need more cops coming from us. We need law enforcement officers that when they get up for the position, their resume and their education shuts down any racist concepts that could be put before them. And we're not doing that. And we need to do it better. Other nations have come over to America and they run areas we should be in. Your neighborhood should not be run. Your neighborhood should not have every other industry and every other ethnicity bringing you resources. And we know that there are a lot of stigmas as to why that took place. But we do have options to change it. But until we unify and understand that in order for us to obey the laws of the land, we also have to begin to affect the laws of the land. And they need to represent the indigenous people of that land. Kingdom perspective. I'll talk more about the Bible after we get you through the history of this piece in our next two sessions. Moderators, I need you to help me while we close out because I'm late for a meeting. Tell us why we're here.
Shalom, everyone. Such an honor for you all to be with us today. You are in the preceding word, and we meet here every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If this is your first time in our room, please make sure that you hit the green house above and become a member. You'll be notified every time that we open a room. As you will see, the replays are on today, but we also record live on Facebook at BWJ Ministries. We are Sabbath keepers, and so please join us under our second club, the Darash Kingdom Ministries. We will be here tonight at 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and then again on Saturday at 11 a.m. as we study the Torah. And you can join us on Sundays for our moral after Sabbath service, which is 10:15 a.m. Eastern Standard Time every Sunday. As well, we have our Wednesday night Bible study at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then don't forget the Bible Book Club. We meet here under our third club, the Bible Book Club, every Thursday at 1 p.m. on Clubhouse only and 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on both Clubhouse and Facebook. It was such an honor to have you join us today. Apostle, we are sending it back over to you.
Thank you so very much. And remember, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of Yahweh, who is our Elohim. To all the leaders who have come to listen and those that will be listening in the archives and the replays, I pray that you understand our heart is just to share the proper information. I understand the ability to have been or could be possibly potentially offended. Please know our intentions are not to offend, but to inform so that we can move forward in a more productive and efficient way. More importantly, proficient. Father, we thank you for the word and will. We thank you for the time. I pray that I've done the job that I've been charged to do, and I've done it in a way that's pleasing to you. I ask you now that we should follow the peace of you with all men and that holiness without which none of us will ever see you. So keep us in your Kodesh. And as we enter into our Shabbat, many of us are going in now, some of them from our continents of Africa, from South Africa, from Uganda, from Ghana, from Sri Lanka, from Vietnam, from the other regions and different time zones have already entered into their Shabbat. I pray you bless them with wisdoms. I pray you for us entering in, coming in just a few hours, and those on the West Coast and the Central Time and Mountain Time, that you would bless us in our time of being with you and settling in with you for our ability to become introspective about life this week. I pray now that salvation reigns in each home listening. And if anyone doesn't know you, we want to let the knowledge of you be evident by our walk and our speech. Now may Yahweh bless you all and keep you. May Yahweh make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May Yahweh lift his countenance upon you and grant you all 13 attributes of his shalom. May Yahweh bless you is my prayer. Have a wonderful day. This call will end in 5.
Thank you for tuning in today. I hope that this message has been a blessing to your very life and your soul, and more importantly, your walk with the King. Well, we have come to the end. I hope that you would consider becoming either a partner with us in ministry, or if you're not already a kingdom citizen, consider becoming one. By doing that, you can sow into this ministry so that we are able to continue to teach this type of ministry at a grand scale. Join us on all of our social media platforms and visit our webpage to make your contributions sure. Thank you. Have a wonderful day. Shalom Aleichem.